Howdy, y'all. Spencer here, and today I'm going to be going over the build that I've been using for the Dhailkhina Command Strike Wing Warbird. This is the current lockbox ship from the Picard lockbox, and it is a very good platform for the meta torpedo stuff that is currently being done at the extreme high end in places like Infected Space Elite. So, this build is also very similar to what you're going to see on other torpedo builds out there. This is pretty much following the torpedo meta, so this build that you're about to see that I'll be going over will transition quite well to any of the other meta torpedo ships out there, like the Section 31, or any of these other ships that have a lieutenant commander or command seat alongside some tactical seating. So that this build that I'm showing you here can very much just be taken and moved over to other ships. So I'm only going to be talking about this torp build with this ship because I feel it would be a waste of both my time and your time if I just talked about the same build on 50 different ships. So let's dive right into it. First weapon here is actually the Delphic dual beam bank. Some people are already going to be wondering why not the Discovery one. So the Discovery 2-piece, if I hit the right button here, the Discovery 2-piece gives you a bit of crit severity, but I already have the 2-piece on, being I have the Loric attack console and I have the Dark Matter Torp on. The 3-piece gives you some torps that fire from the, like an extra torp that fires from the Dark Matter, and in my experience, that torpedo does not do enough DPS from the parses that I have seen. It's there, but it's also, to me, it's a bit underwhelming. So with this Delphic dual beam bank, being I'm running also the Delphic torpedo, I'm getting a 2-piece that has some crit chance and severity. So that is why I've opted to run that 2-piece instead of running the Disco 3-piece. So let's move on to the torpedoes, because these are really the big aspects of this build. These are the core weapons that you're going to be using here. So I'm going to go through the torpedoes first and then how you'd want to fire them afterwards. The first torpedo is the EBM, or Enhanced Biomolecular. This is the torpedo that you want every high yield to go to, essentially. It is insanely potent with high yield. It does so much damage. When you look at any top parse, you're going to see the EBM as the top performer because it is just absurdly powerful, because when you have high yield with it, it does AoE damage, and it's just such a big heavy hitter. It's a single torpedo instead of like multiple torpedoes in a salvo, so when it hits, it really hits hard. The Delphic Torp is also a fairly good performer under high yield, but you really want to do your best to make sure that the EBM gets all the high yields possible. Then after the Delphic, you got the Neutronic, and the Neutronic is really good with torpedo spreads. So if you get any ETM procs, Entwined Tactical Matrices, which is Starship Trait we'll go over here in a few minutes, you're going to want to make sure that the Neutronic is firing those spreads if possible. The Dark Matter also does fairly well under Torp spread, but to be honest, I feel like the Dark Matter is mostly there and present on most Torp builds just for the crit severity that you get from the 2-piece. Now, there's 2 approaches to firing these torpedoes, and one of them is very easy. The other one is a massive pain. So the first approach is going to be to simply set an auto fire order that goes like this. You're going to make sure your EBM fires first. You're going to right click on the EBM. You're going to then right click on the Delphic, then the Neutronic, and then the Dark Matter. So you want the EBM to fire first, the Delphic second, the Neutronic third, and then the Dark Matter fourth. And you will have some success with this. You're not going to get the most bleeding edge min-max numbers, but this is so much easier to use than doing the manual fire approach that I'll discuss next. This is what I did to set my record that's currently up on the table. And I could have definitely gone a little bit higher had I been manually firing my torps, but having now been doing the manual fire for the past week or so, I would highly recommend most people don't do it. Yeah, you'll do more DPS with manual fire, but it will make your game, you will have so much more micromanagement to do that it'll start to take away from your piloting, and it can make things a little bit less fun. So I would just stick to this auto fire sequence that I just did here, which was the EBM, Delphic, Neutronic, and then Dark Matter. That'll just save you so much time. Otherwise, let me pull up a screen capture here. Give me a moment. I'm going to swap over to my display capture scene. Otherwise, you need to do something like this here, which these are my current keybinds. They're a mess, but you see how I have mouse button 5 here with the high yield keybinds? So essentially, mouse button 5 is the forward, it's a side button on my mouse, and it's the forward facing button. If I hit that, that would fire my high yield torps. If I hit the back side button on my mouse, I would have them fire torp spread torps, which would be the Neutronic and the Dark Matter. And yes, you can do more DPS with this. This is what you saw me doing in that solo ISE video, but it is such a pain to work with that I would highly recommend most of you don't even bother. It will give you more DPS, but it will massively increase the skill requirement of flying your ship. So I would, this is a case where I'd very much just recommend not doing it, even though a lot of people say, oh, just do it. It's a lot of work, and you can get used to it, but I don't think for most people it's really worth the effort. So let me swap back to the stow scene. So yeah, that's auto fire versus manual fire torps there. Let's move on to the rest of the build. The deflector is a fleet colony deflector, and the reason this is used is the proc that scales based on hull chance, or like your hull percentage. It gives you up to 15% crit severity and 4% crit chance if you're at 100% HP, and it will drop as your hull decreases. So that's a pretty good deflector to be running there. And that is from the Fleet Colony, the Drenner Colony. For the Impulse engines here, I've got the Competitive Reputation Innervated engines. Every time I hit a fire at will, high yield, scatter volley, whatever, any firing modes like that, it is giving me an evasive maneuvers, essentially. So I can really spam that evasive maneuvers quite a bit, essentially, and when you're doing high DPS stuff, having a very good speed to get to the next target it's a crucial aspect to DPS. So speed is something you'll see pop up quite a bit with this build. For the core, I decided to just do the Disco 2-piece with the shield. So the core isn't really anything too special, but the shield is really quite popular because it gives you a buff based on your shield power that gives you additional damage against enemy shields. So that is really quite nice to have when you're doing elite content or anything that has a lot of shields on it. And that 2-piece gives me 120% hull regen. So if I take this, you see right here I'm at 178 hull repair rate. If I take that off, I drop to 58. If I slot it back on, goes back up to 178. So that is a very nice passive survivability buff, but do keep in mind, being that is your passive hull repair, that will not show up in a parser under healing, because like the DPRM or the Protomatter consoles, hull repair just doesn't show up on the combat log because it's just passive regen by the game. For the aft weapons, these are the Thoron-infused quantum mine launchers. I'm running 2 of them. I have tested like using the competitive mine launcher, but I always found that the Thorons were just doing a tad more for me, and when you use these Thorons, you really want to spec them out to be damage times 4. The thing to keep in mind is, let me pull my desktop back up here. When you're talking about damage modifiers, they are a final modifier, and these mine builds can run You got the 4 damage mods, and then you have 2 of the epic. You get the damage. Now, the epic damage modifier is actually 2 damage mods combined, so it's a 6% final multiplier, and then you get 2 of them. So when you use damage times 4 on a mine, it's a 26% final damage boost after all of your other boosts that you have on your build. So I think with any career, I would probably, with regards to mines, I would probably go damage all the way. But if you wanted to go crit D on an engineer side, I would say just give it a shot and see which works better for you. But I'm a big fan, especially when it comes to mines, of stacking as many of the damage modifiers as you can, because that 26.46% final damage boost is rather potent. Now, moving on, there's a few different experimental weapons that you could use, and this Soliton Wave Impeller is really quite popular in the current meta. And the reason for it is because with these torpedo builds, you don't really need weapon power. So you see I've got my engine power cranked up quite a bit here. And if I hover over the experimental weapon, you see how there's this haste to the weapon that increases with engine power? It's the second line from the bottom there. If I hit emergency power to engines here, and that raises my engine power up to 125, you see that caps out an 250% haste to this weapon. So this weapon fires extremely fast, and it does a decent amount of damage, so it's a really popular option for meta DPS stuff right now. Though if you still want to run something like the Proto-Metalay Sheller, that'd be fine, or any other experimental weapon. You know, it's personal preference. Choose whatever you want, but that Soliton Wave Impeller is a very good choice right now in the current meta. Moving down to devices here. Kinetic amplifiers, these are crafted from the Projectiles crafting school. You just craft them in groups of 5, and if you get a crit, you can get 10 of them, as you just saw there. And what these do is they give you a 30% Cat 2 bonus projectile damage boost for 20 seconds. Now, it will only be 10 seconds if you did not select the battery expertise option in the skill tree. So if you look at your first engineering node here and you see you don't have battery expertise selected, I'd be re-rolling, because that is really crucial to most endgame builds to be able to get the most out of your batteries and devices. The second thing that I have here is the deuterium surplus. You can Google how to unlock these, but there's a specific chain of a mission you have to do to unlock the ability to craft these in the engineering category, I believe. Let me pull that up just to verify here. Yeah, you'll be able to craft them under the engineering crafting school once you unlock them from a mission. Just go to Google and find what mission that is, because I do not remember off the top of my head. Someone may even leave it down in the comments, and if they do, I'll probably pin that message. Other 2 devices, I've got the Temporal Negotiator. This is from the current Delta recruitment event. This, when you hit it, it just instantly reduces most of your abilities down to their global cooldown. So it's a really nice device to have, especially handy if you're doing content where you get sub-nuked. It does have a 5-minute cooldown, but if you get sub-nuked, you can hit that and immediately you have a lot of abilities back, so really quite handy. And then the last device here is the Kobayashi Maru, and the purpose of using this is you'll want to use this at the start of an ISE run, or any run really, to get the buffs from it, because it gives a variety of buffs, as you can see there, but the big ones are going to be the 10% max hull and the 10% bonus damage. Those are the 2 big ones that you want from this, and it's random what you get, so I would always say to hit that, hit the button to call the resupply about 20 to 25 seconds before the ISE starts. When you see the timer get down to 25 or 20 seconds, you hit it then, so you start getting the buffs then. Okay, moving down to the consoles here. For the Universal Console, I've already went over this, but this is the Lorca. This is from the Discovery Reputation, and it's just a really nice console to have on there. It gives you, as you can see, 3.9% crit chance. Gives you some weapon power, but the most important aspect of it to me is the shield penetration. Now, do keep in mind, though, that while 157 shield pen sounds fine, that is only actually like 7 to 8% shield pen, so it is nice to have on there, though, because all that shield pen does add up, and you really need all the shield pen you can get for elite content. And once again, that is in a 2-piece with the Dark Matter Quantum, and that gives you up to 25% crit severity. Engineering consoles. So the first one is one that you can get really cheap off the exchange, and it's the Swarmer Matrix. This does a little bit of damage, but the crucial thing for it is it gives you plus 50 projectile weapon training, and it gives you a speed boost and damage boost for your Hangar Pets and targetable torpedoes. Now, I have no targetable torpedoes on this build, but still the other buffs that it provides assist with the overall build. And this is a cheap console you can get off the exchange for well under 10 million EC the last time I checked. Next up, we have the DPRM. I don't think I have to talk about this one much because everyone knows that it is just the most powerful console in the game for the most part. It is an insanely powerful damage boost and survivability boost with that plus 500% hull regen and the plus 40% Cat 2 bonus damage boost. And I do have it on for a 2-piece, though the 2-piece isn't really providing much because that 2-piece, as you just saw, buffs Phaser, Disruptor, and Plasma weapons, and I'm not running energy weapons for the most part, other than the Delphic. So that 2-piece doesn't matter a ton, but the reason I'm running it is because the DPRM is a good console, and the Point Defense Bombardment Warhead console, which comes off the NX, or any variant of the NX at Tier 6, is a really good console for a torpedo build. Like, it's like a miniature locator. It gives you 1% crit chance, it gives you plus 25% projectile damage, and it has a clicky that does a few thousand DPS in good runs. So it's a decent console to run overall in a torp build, in my opinion. The fourth engineering console is the Bioneural. This is not a surprise to anybody, I would hope. It gives the reason you run this is it gives you a little bit of hull capacity, and it gives you, that's the crit severity is the big thing. That's 26% crit severity. So that is quite potent. Moving down to the science consoles is another Lobi console, and this time it's the Ultimid. The Ultimid is a really nice console. It gives you some accuracy, and it gives you another 3.9% crit chance. So that crit chance alone is really, really nice. It does also have an ultimate drone that it spawns around you, which is this little annoying yellow thing that you see around people. It's from this Ultimate console, and this is a Lobi console, if I didn't say it already. It's the crit chance on it makes it a core part to so many endgame builds right now at the high end. But if you don't have the Lobi, you can pretty much substitute the Bioneural or it with any like rep Lobi consoles, or not any rep crit chance or severity consoles that you have. Like, you know, that they're not as good, but you could run the assimilated, the 0 point module from the Romulan rep. Like these consoles are not the best thing anymore, but it's not like they're terrible. The 0 point would be a good filler console until you can get a better Lobi console. You know, there's a lot of options out there. You don't have to follow all of these Lobi consoles or all these consoles exactly. The second science console is going to be the Ferrofluid console. This is from the Terran Reputation. Now, the reason that this is popular is because it gives a reduction to the shared recharge time between torpedoes, and any source of reduction to torpedo cooldowns that you can get is generally preferred. Though on a build like this, you're not going to have room for the DOFs that help with that cooldown, but you can use stuff like the ferrofluid here, or ceaseless momentum, which I'll get to in a few minutes. TAC console-wise, 4 of these are just torpedo locators. Now, I really wish we had a quantum version of the biomolecular, because every other torpedo on this build is quantum, and the mines are quantum. The issue when you run these torpedo consoles is these aren't really buffing your mines. Like, you see my mines here, 8, 5, 6, 7. Like, they're not affected by these torpedo locators. So I'm running 4 of those, and then in the 5th TAC console here, or the first one here, I guess, is the Fekri Torment engine. This is from one of the recent story missions they did, and it's a really good buff for a few different abilities, and it does fairly decent DPS looking at some parses. The big thing here with it, I'd say, is its effects on Subspatial Warhead, which is a core trait to really make these torpedo builds shine. It has a slight buff to that, which actually let's look at here real quick. So I'm going to deslot this console, and I'm going to look at Subspatial Warhead. You see 1825. Just bumped it up a little bit there, so that Fekri console buffs Subspatial Warheads, which is a significant DPS source for these torpedo builds, and it's just really quite a nice console. Like, it does a decent amount of damage, and it's a free one. You can get it from a mission. Let me find which mission it is here. Was it Leap of Faith? Yeah, Leap of Faith here. You get it from that mission, so that mission sort of sucks because it's ground, but it's worth running it to get that console on a torpedo build. And then for the Hangar Pet here, I've got the Elite Near Universe Shuttlecraft. These are unlocked, I believe, from having the Sticks or the Mirror Strike Wing Escort, so really good pets to have. They don't have torpedoes on them, so they're not going to steal your concentrate fire powers. And they have a tractor beam, which is quite nice for helping hold targets in place. So really nice pets to have, though they are rather expensive. You could substitute these with any pets that you want, though I would highly recommend that you look for pets that do not have torpedoes on them. Pets that have torpedoes on them will steal your high yields from concentrate firepower, which are a very significant source of your damage output, and the torpedoes that your pets fire are doing nothing in comparison to what your torps are doing. So if you're running a torpedo build, please do not run pets that have torps on them. That's all I can say there. You will make your life harder if you do. Let's go over to stations. So for the stations here, I'm running this as an Oxtabat setup, and with this ship specifically, you don't really have a ton of room to do anything else. So let me just go over the engineer first. The engineer is what is like triggering most of my DOFs here too. Like, both of these Oxtabats trigger these 3 technician DOFs. Okay, these are what give me my cooldown reduction. Every time I hit any rank of Oxtabat, I am getting a 30% cooldown reduction to my bridge officer abilities. You saw how much it impacted the cooldown there. So Oxtabat it's a very old but still very effective cooldown reduction method for your bridge officer abilities. And then I have emergency powered engines here, and I have that used alongside the emergency con hologram duty officer. And so I'll hit evasive maneuvers here. You see it's up still. Okay, when I hit emergency powered engines, you see how it just reduced that cooldown from like 40 seconds to 5? That's because this emergency con hologram duty officer is resetting the cooldown of evasive maneuvers whenever I hit emergency powered engines. So that is why you see emergency powered engines being used on pretty much every high-end build that you see out there. That is just a really crucial thing, because speed is DPS. The quicker you can get to your next target, the more DPS you're going to be doing, because you're not having as much downtime between your buffs, and you're compressing the overall completion time of the map by being able to move faster to the next target. Okay, so while I'm here on DOS, let's just go over the rest of them. Sardis Cret, every time I fire a torpedo, it's a chance to get the stacking damage bonus, so that's quite handy. And then my other duty officer is 27 to 47. This guy is expensive. He's like 500 million EC right now. You can substitute this with whatever you have. Any projectile, crit chance, crit severity DOF would work. But if you really want to shell out the money, 27 to 47 gives you... It has a chance to give you crit chance and severity depending on what type of abilities you hit. So it gives you... whenever you hit a tactical bridge officer ability, you have a 15% chance to improve crit severity by 20% for 30 seconds. And whenever you hit an intel ability, you have a 30% chance to improve crit chance by 2.5% for 30 seconds. So just a really good duty officer if you have the abilities to trigger it and you really want to spend that much for a duty officer. Because as I said, this guy is literally 500 million EC. Some of these Borg duty officers cost as much as a ship. And they are not needed. Like, as I just said, you could substitute him with any projectile weapon officer that gives you, like, crit chance or crit severity. Like, you don't have to use him. There's a... You can do perfectly fine using one of these crit chance or crit severity DOFs. Okay. So we went over the engineering abilities. Let's go over the science here. You see I've got just a tractor beam here, and the reason for me running a tractor beam is going to be this unconventional system Starship trait. Whenever you use a control ability, it gives you a 7% cooldown reduction to all of your universal consoles. So on this build, that means I'm giving my DPRM, the point defense, and then the Swarmer console each a slight cooldown reduction every time I hit a tractor beam, which can be quite substantial in a longer duration fight. That tractor beam triggers the unconventional systems trait, and that's its entire point. Going over to the Lieutenant Tactical here, Chemosite 1, Chemosite's just an enhancement mode for that stacks on top of all of your other abilities for your weapons. So every time you fire your weapons while Chemosite is active, you're getting a little bit of additional damage out of it. So that's a good ability to have on there, and that's really cheap from the exchange. Cannon Scatter Volley. This is used to trigger the Entwined Tactical Matrices trait, which is this thing right here. Every time I hit fire, wheel, or scatter volley, I give myself a torpedo spread 1. So you want to make sure to have these separated on the tray, though, a little bit, because when you hit, like you'll see here, when I hit fire at will, it gives me a torp spread. If I then hit scatter volley, I don't gain an additional torp spread. So you want to make sure to hit like your fire at will, then fire the torp spread, and then you hit your scatter volley a second later and fire another torp spread. If you hit them at the same time on your spam tray, you're not going to get 2 torp spreads. One of the buffs is just going to overwrite the other, and you're only going to get 1. So make sure to separate those out and try to hit them at different times so you get the most out of this trait. So that explains why the scatter volley is there, and then the fire at will. I have an attack pattern beta 1. This is here for the debuff. And being this commander attack is also a command seat, I can run Concentrate Firepower. Now, Concentrate Firepower is a crucial core component of these torpedo builds. It is, you mark it on a target, and then every time you damage that target with your torpedoes, you have a chance to give yourself a high yield. If someone else or a pet deals kinetic damage to that target, they can steal a proc from you. This is why it's important that you don't use pets that have torpedoes on them, because if you do, they're going to steal these procs from you and lower your overall damage output. So make sure to try and mark concentrate firepower on big targets that will be alive for as long as possible, and on targets that you are really focusing on. You don't want to hit this on something small that's going to die right away, because then you just wasted the ability. And then we got the big boy here at the commander slot. Call Emergency Artillery 3. This thing got a major buff back in March following the release of the Janeway. This was part of the command rework that they did, and they made this ability good. Now, when you look at the high-end parses, you're going to see that it's doing like 150 to 200k DPS. And I need to emphasize quite a bit here that the performance that you get from this trait is entirely dependent on the crowd control abilities that you bring and your team brings to a map. If you do not have crowd control like a gravity well to group up all the spheres on a transformer, you're not going to get much damage out of this ability. I would still run it because it can still do fairly well against targets that I'm focusing on, but if you don't have that crowd control to help you out in a run, especially if you're not in like a really high-end environment, you're not going to get 150 to 200k out of this ability. It's entirely reliant on you timing it properly and using it at the right spots. Like the other thing too is to note, you can't activate this if you're point blank against a target. You have to be 2 kilometers away. It says it right there, 2 to 10 kilometer range. You have to be 2 kilometers away from your target in order to call it in, and then it will send a barrage of little artillery ships in that will just devastate the area. So if you have a teammate that runs with you that can run a gravwell and gravwell the spheres to a gateway or the transformers, then you're going to be getting a lot out of this ability. But if you don't, you're still going to get decent DPS out of it, but you're not going to get anything comparable to what we're seeing at the high end out of it, because it's really situational. You could run a gravity well yourself on this ship. If you watched my solo run, you saw that I did that. But it really, I can't emphasize enough that this ability, Call Emergency Artillery 3, does a lot of damage, but only in certain scenarios. But it is a core thing that has pushed these command ships up even further to the top of the ISE meta. Because if you use it right, you can look at those high-end parses and you just see how potent it is. Okay, last seat here is the Lieutenant Commander Universal / Intel. If you watched the solo vid, you saw that I was running this as a Psi, and that I was running a high yield 1 instead of a tractor beam. So basically on that solo build, I swapped this over to a Psi to run the gravity well, of course, and then just dropped this, and I just swapped these 2 seats around, essentially. Let me get back on point here, though. For this, I'm running high yield 3, Mines Dispersal Pattern Beta 1 to help buff the mines, and then I'm running Intel Team. Now, Intel Team, if you saw that video, you saw that I was running 2 of these Intel Teams like this. Now, the reason for running Intel Team is another trait that I'm using. So, Intel Team gives you quite a bit of stealth and lowers your threat generation, but if you stack it alongside this trait called Exodus Active Probat, which is from the Section 31 Intel Science Destroyer, or there's still a few trait boxes on the KDF side that may still be cheap. Go check if you need one. Whenever you hit any Intel Bridge Officer ability or jam sensors, it gives you more stealth, it gives you some control expertise, but the big thing here right in the middle, 15% bonus Cat 2 weapon damage for 20 seconds. That's, that is something, because the Intel teams have a rather short cooldown, you can literally run this trait with 100% uptime. This trait is this trait combined with 2 Intel teams, and if you're doing the 2 Intel teams, you'll want the trait Fresh from R&R alongside that. Here it is. If you run Fresh from R&R, it lowers the global cooldown of these team abilities to 10 seconds. So if I run the 2 intel teams, Fresh from R&R and Exodus, it gives me 100% uptime with intel team, and it gives me this additional stealth and then the bonus damage and all that just constantly. So I'll hit intel team again here. You see it's 10 seconds duration, and well, it seems that the servers are not liking me because this... Oh, it activated on my pet. Okay, never mind. It's just 100% uptime here. Like, Intel team... This is how I was able to do the solo run, and it's how people have been able to do the solo runs for a while now. It's because you can chain these 2 Intel teams with the Fresh from R&R trait and Exodus Active Probat, and you just have massive survivability. Now, this is sort of separate from the rest of the build, but you can take this combo here and use this on basically any intel ship or any ship that has at least a lieutenant intel seating, because Fresh from R&R is a rather cheap trait. Intel team you can easily get a hold of. The only thing that's going to be hard to get is Exodus Active Probat, because it's from a rather expensive lockbox ship, and the cross-faction trait boxes are in very limited supply. So I think I just got really off topic there, and I apologize for that. Let's get back to the rest of the traits. Personal space traits, a good day to die. This allows me to use Go Down Fighting at any HP level. If I disable that, you see I can no longer hit Go Down Fighting. Context is for Kings, gives me a damage boost or resistance boost. Fleet Coordinator gives me a damage boost for each teammate that I have in the run. In the solo run, I did swap this out for, I think it was Resonating Payload Modification. Yeah. So in that high-end, or in that solo run, I swapped out the Fleet Coordinator for Resonating Payload Modification. That's entirely up to you as to whether or not you want to do that. It depends on what type of content you're running, really. Then next up, I have Intelligence Agent Attache. This, every time I get a critical strike, it gives me a cooldown reduction to captain abilities. This trait is insanely expensive right now, but within the next few weeks, the price of it will crash down to around 20 million. The issue is Cryptic forgot to add it into the Infinity Lockbox with the rest of the Baul Lockbox items, so when they add it in there, hopefully any week now, it will make the price crash significantly. Then I've got Superior Projectile Training for the 7.5 bonus weapon damage. In the solo run, I had Fresh from R&R, but in normal runs with the team, I run Unconventional Systems with the Tractor Beam to give me that universal console cooldown reduction. Then I have Self-Modulating Fire because it gives a significant amount of shield pen, like every 45 seconds. Really, really quite nice. Kinetic Precision, this is unlocked from having level 15 in the Projectiles Crafting School, and it gives you 10% projectile shield pen, so that's really nice to have. And then the last trait I have is Terran Targeting Systems. If you're on an alien character, you could slot another trait of your choice. Really, just any of your meta picks would be fine. Even just adding Resonating Payload Modification would be a solid pick. Okay, Starship Traits. Ceaseless Momentum. This is still rather cheap on the Fed side, but it's really expensive for Klingons. It's from the I can't remember the exact name of it. Is it like the Nikej or something? It's the Klingon ship that like rams into other ships. If you know what I'm talking about, I would just say to Google it to get the exact name of the ship, but this gives some really nice buffs to torpedoes, and it reduces the recharge time of torps quite substantially once you build up the stacks. Entwined Tactical Matrices, I already went over this trait. When I hit Fire, Wheel, or Scatter Volley, it gives me a Torpedo Spread 1, but it's important to separate activating those because if you activate those at the same time, you're going to only get 1 torpedo spread instead of 2. Exodus Active Probat, I spent bit of time on this one. This is the trait that allows for solo runs to be really possible for the elite queues. The first person I saw running this was Super Taiga, and he did a solo ISC over a year ago on the VOMP with it, and he even did a solo HSC with the VOMP using this trait. It's just, that combo I mentioned before is just such an insanely powerful combo. It really helps with survivability. You will take some damage still with it, but like you can go back and just look at the solo ISE run I uploaded last week, and you'll see like just how little threat I had for a large chunk of that match. Like, my threat gen was so low that they were targeting the subspatial tears from the subspatial warhead trait here instead of me, which to me is insane. So, jumping to subspatial warheads, every time you fire a high yield or transport warhead, you are like spawning in a subspace tear that does a ton of damage to targets within 1 kilometer of your target. This trait is insanely powerful. This is a core trait to making a torpedo build really excel at the high end. If you don't have this trait for a torpedo build, you should really be prioritizing looking at it. There's no substitute for it. It comes from the Sona Intel Battlecruiser, and if you go and look at any parse on the table at the high end, like I'm gonna let me swap scenes. I open up the table here. We're going to just look at my run here. And you're going to see that these subspatial warheads did quite a bit. They show up under pets. You will have one listing that usually shows up under the normal damage. That was 8.7. But if I look under pets, 171k just from that subspatial warhead trait. And really, you want to, that's a core part of these builds, is you're spamming as many high yields as possible to give you more of these tears. So this trait is insanely crucial for high-end torpedo performance. And then I had the Ruin of Our Enemies. Now, you can run this. Some people would run Automated Aggression. It's really up to you. You can give everything a shot and just see what you prefer. But the Ruin of Our Enemies is rather expensive for feds now. It used to be rather cheap, being there used to be a cross-faction pack you could get it from. But this comes off of the, I believe the promo D7 Miracle Worker ship. So it's a really good trait, but it's a bit hard to get. In fact, I will Google this for us right now, just make sure there's no other sources for it. I'll bring this up on screen even for y'all. Yeah, it's from the D7 Miracle Worker Flight Deck Carrier, which is the promo ship. And it used to be available from a cross-faction bundle for feds. There may still be a few on the exchange, but those are probably in extremely limited supply now. And then the last trait I have on here is Terran Goodbye. And when you defeat a foe, you can get a stack of plus 25 accuracy and plus 5% crit chance for 20 seconds. This can stack up to 3 times. So that's up to 15% crit chance. That is extremely popular and potent for these high-end builds. However, you will only get a stack of this if you defeat the foe, if you get the kill shot. So if you're doing content where you're not killing stuff as fast, or if you're competing with other DPSers in the run, I might be a little bit more hesitant to run this trait in some scenarios, but overall it's still a really good trait to run on these builds, especially if you're going for a high-end record. You really want to have Terran Goodbye on there. When I did the solo run, though, I dropped both Ruin of Our Enemies and Terran Goodbye for Superior Area Denial. And I used Superior Area Denial because it gives a a debuff whenever I hit my fall or scatter volley. It essentially gives me another attack pattern beta 1. It also buffs the pets, but that debuff is still really good to have. And the other trait that I ended up running for that solo run, I dropped the Ruin trait for Cold-Hearted. So when I hit Aux to Bat, my energy weapon, which is the dual beam bank in this case, is debuffing anything that I shoot. And it's not building up stacks super fast. The difference between Cold-Hearted and Sad is Sad will immediately apply just one stack of a minus 30 debuff, like an attack pattern beta 1. And Cold-Hearted needs to build up 5 stacks on a target. So Cold-Hearted's not as effective on a build like this, but for that solo run, it was still additional debuff that helped in some cases. If I were to try the solo run again, I might try dropping Cold-Hearted for like automated aggression here just to give me some extra damage, but that debuff was really crucial to help me do that solo run. Space rep traits. These are all pretty common. Advanced targeting systems for the crit severity, precision for the crit chance, Tyler's duality for the crit chance that scales with your whole capacity, with a cap at 7.5%. Omega kinetic shearing, which helps deal additional damage from your torps. And then torpedo pre-fire sequence, which is just a raw Cat 2 bonus torpedo damage buff. Really, really potent. And I'm going to note too, I forgot to mention this before, but there's another device that I use that I keep these right in my inventory. They're called Prototype Ablative Jevnite Hardpoints. These come from some DOF missions, from some DOF packs, and you can also buy them off the exchange. And when you hit them, you saw here, plus 100 Starship hull capacity skill. So you see my hull here is 113k. If I hit this, that will increase it to 130k. If you're in ships that have a lot of HP, you can really get quite a bit out of these. They last for 15 minutes and they will persist through death, but they are a 15-minute duration buff, so just keep that in mind. And they will cost UEC to get, usually. And that will help Tyler's duality here just a little bit with the amount of crit chance that I get from it. Let me go over specializations quick. Intel primary, because flanking is still really good, and the Intel fleet is still really nice for that shield and armor pen. You ideally want to have teammates also using Intel fleet to try and chain Intel fleet for the entire run if possible. And then for the secondary, I'm using the Temporal Operative. Being this is the secondary, I only am getting the bonuses from Tier 1 and 2. But the Tier 1 is the big thing here. Entropic Rider is a proc that will trigger quite a bit off of projectile weapons, and it will do a fair bit of damage. You can, if I go back and look at like my parse here, where is, you see Entropic Rider there did 17k, which is fairly, it's not the best thing ever, but it's still fairly decent. So that's just an additional source of damage. It's quite popular with a bunch of Torp users right now. Skill tree wise, I've changed this up a little bit since the last video. I've done a few respecs to try and mess around with a few different builds. This skill tree isn't perfect. You may want to change some aspects for your build, like you may want to move some of these science skills over to other things. It's entirely up to you what you do here. But I opted to max out hull capacity to help increase the amount of crit chance I get from Tyler's duality. Energy weapons and projectiles are both, of course, maxed out. And let's see, I still have EPS for when I'm running energy weapon builds. I have 1 point in impulse expertise, 2 points in accuracy, 1 point in defense, and everything else tack-wise maxed out. I got the offensive subsystem tuning, which is really helpful, especially being I'm on a Romulan, and Romulans just natively have less power. So that gives me 4.8 weapons and engines power. Warp core potential for additional power, and then warp core efficiency. This just gives a lot of power for subsystems that have lower power settings, like my aux power here. It's so that's giving me up to plus 10 subsystem power when I have a subsystem at like 15 and like power setting there, so it's quite handy. And then I have this skill tree is essentially it's got a lot of investment into the tactical side to have a maxed out ultimate. And I used to only run a 26-point ultimate, but it's become quite popular to run 27 points. So you can help with the cooldown reduction for others on your team. Because with some of the other cooldown reduction methods now, there can be a little bit of a gap for some bet points. So having this is just meant to help your team out. For the nodes that I have selected, I already mentioned battery expertise. That's crucial. I went with sector space travel speed, hangar weaponry. If I move over to the second row here, or second column, I went for max shield capacity under science. Then all the crit chance stuff that I could for TAC. I went for 2 additional accuracy rating. And then, of course, I maxed out the ultimate, as I said already. So this build, I know I've went over quite a bit here, and I may have been like a bit all over the place there, but I hope this has been thorough enough to explain things for you all. What I'm going to do now, actually, is I'm going to pull up my YouTube channel, and we're going to go over some runs that I've done with this ship. So you've all hopefully seen the solo video, but I think we just go with let's go with the record video for this. I didn't want to release like my record run, especially without some sort of explanation, and I'm not probably going to release it as a separate video just because I'll just explain it here. And really, it's when you've seen one of these high-end runs, you've seen them all for the most part. With a run like this, you see I have one recluse supporting me with a lot of debuff. I have a Styx in here tanking for me, so I don't have to worry about my survivability. And then the other ship we had in this run was a Herc Dread, and it's another ship in there that can use concentrate firepower, so that's very beneficial to me, especially being I'm the only Torp user in the run, so I'm getting a lot of high yield procs from them marking targets with concentrate firepower alongside me. So the big thing to keep in mind is I already mentioned, like if I go back to like what I said earlier on, when you do call emergency artillery, you want to have someone gravel a target, and once they have graveled in like the spheres around a target, you want to try and hit your concentrate firepower. Then you will get substantially more out of the concentrate firepower by doing that. Or not the call emergency artillery, I'm sorry. You see how when it's around those, when it's on the TAC cube there and all those spheres are sucked into it, like it's doing a substantial amount of damage. You can hit it a little bit earlier. Like I hit it early at the sides here at points, and I'm going to note too, this run was entirely with auto fire on the torpedoes. I have been practicing with manual fire with the torps, which you saw me do in the solo ISE run, but I am very much not proficient with those yet. Something else that I failed to do in this run was take advantage of the cloak ambush. That used to be something we used to do quite a bit back in the early days of like the DPS chasing with the scimitars, but I've gone quite a bit sloppy with it over the years. So you'll notice too, I'm firing a lot of torp spread EBMs. If I were doing manual fire with the torps, I would be getting substantially more out of my torpedo damage, but because I am too lazy to do that in some of these runs, I am limited in what I am doing. So when you see here, I'm going to back up. You see I'm hitting my call emergency artillery as these spheres are being sucked on top of the gateway, and you're going to see my DPS spike quite substantially over that. Like you see I'm at 1.1 mil here. I call in the call emergency artillery, and like look at just the DPS rise from that. Like the amount of damage. I'm trying to hit as many AoE buffs as I can, and then I swap over to the tac cube. I probably swapped over a smidge too early, because I think there were some spheres there, but those get dragged over to the tac cube here shortly anyways. And then ganked back. So this run definitely had a lot of room for improvement. I'll link it down below. I'm not going to release it publicly as its own video, but if you want to go through and like review the flight path or anything like that, I'd say to go for it. But this run could have been quite a bit better, but you know, it's all just RNG and practice, and I haven't been doing a ton of these runs, so I'll have that link down below if you want to check it out. If you have any if you have any questions or comments about like this build or any of the things I've talked about here, you know, feel free to ask down below. I'm going to start to wrap things up here because this is now an hour long. My throat is quite dry and I need to go get some food here shortly. So I hope that this video's been sort of helpful. I know it's all over the place, but I decided to do this in a live format because if I tried to do it piece by piece and then edit it together later on, I figured that I would never actually get it done. So yeah, I hope that this has been helpful for you. I hope that you've been able to take something from this video. This is definitely a very long video. But yeah, once again, if you have any questions or comments, just leave them down below. This build can easily be transferred over to a variety of other ships if you want. You may see me messing around with some of those other ships on streams whenever I do decide to stream. It's an incredibly fun build to fly. It's super effective in elite content, but when you take it down into normal or advanced content, it is inferior to a cannon build. Torps just move too slow for the lower difficulty content, so this is very much a build focused at elite content. And if you set it up in some of the same ways I have, like with that X-Dis trait, it's one that will also allow you to have great survivability solo. So if you have an opportunity to try it out, or at least try some of the aspects of it out on your various builds, then I hope that it can help you out, and I hope that it can help enhance your immersion. But that is it for today's video, so thank you all for sticking along, because this is way too long of a video. But that is it for today, so I will see you all next time.